Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the last few lectures, we have been discussing the notion of foregrounding with reference to the two particular techniques that foregrounding employs for the sake of bringing something in literature to the forefront and making the text and the writing prominent or deviant from the normal standards of speech and writing. As deviation revealed that it is rule breaking, and the writers may choose a variety of ways of breaking the rules. Either those ways are lexical deviations or phonological deviations or graphological deviations. Similarly, another way of deviating from the norms or making something appear prominent and distinctive in the writing is through the use of parallelism. In parallelism, the writers create order, balance, rhythm, rhyme, symmetry, and balance in the writing. Now, when such symmetry is created and balance is created in the text, there are plenty of devices which are at the disposal of an author. Now, when we say that a writer deviates or makes use of parallel structures, now deviation and parallel structures would be possible only with the help of certain devices which are referred to as rhetorical devices. Now, today's topic, that is the study of schemes and tropes. This topic relates to the study of foregrounding, deviation, and parallelism. In that, we are reaching to the very minute techniques which are the elements of the language or the devices used in a language which we employ or the writers employ in order to deviate or in order to create parallel structure. That the purpose of everything is to make something prominent or to bring something to the forefront. As the very title of today's topic, schemes and tropes, is concerned. Now, scheme and trope, these are the two different ways of creating foregrounding in a text. Now, what do they both employ? What do they both contain? What are the various devices within each of these schemes and tropes both, which a writer may make use of for the sake of creating foregrounding in the text? Now, schemes and tropes, this term might be new to you. You may not have heard it before, but what it encompasses within it as the different forms of devices, techniques, and rhetorical figures or figures of speech, they must be pretty much familiar. Now, the word schemes and tropes derived from the Greek word has a little novelty in it, as the word scheme has been used in the classical Greek rhetoric to refer to the form, to refer to the shape of things, as of course the form and shape of text and writing. In classical rhetoric and literature and writing, schemes and tropes fall under the canon of style. When we talk about literary style, we look for which particular schemes and tropes are employed, or in other words, which different figures of speech or stylistic devices or literary devices have been employed in the text. Now, these devices, which are literary devices like simile, metaphor, personification, these are of plenty of types. There are innumerable varieties of such schemes. You may have come across just a few of those, like simile, metaphor, personification, euphemism, irony, pun. But apart from these very ordinary, simple, and repeatedly used devices, there are certain devices which are used by the writers, but as a student of stylistics, as a student of the study of literary texts, we will be familiarized to these forms, methods, techniques, and figures of speech in our study of schemes and tropes. For the sake of understanding what they really are, where did they emerge from, what do they contain within them, we will look at both of these schemes and tropes one by one. And just to clarify very simple link between schemes and tropes and deviations. The link between schemes and tropes and deviations and parallelism is that schemes are used to create parallelism and tropes are used to create deviation. So schemes are such rhetorical figures or such literary devices which create order, balance, rhythm, rhyme, repetition, symmetry in a text. Whereas tropes are those devices which turn the meaning, which disrupt the meaning, which break the balance and order of a text, hence create deviation. So deviation is created through the use of tropes or changing the meaning, and schemes are used to create parallelism or creating order and rule making. So these stylistic features or devices which fall under the category of schemes and tropes, they add flavor to writing. A distinctive literary flavor is added to writing when meaning is enhanced, when the form of the text is changed. So in any speech and writing, if a writer wishes to make it different, unusual, attractive, and of course more literary, he would employ schemes and tropes or such literary figures of speech which are persuasive devices, which are not merely decorative devices, but such devices also have an emotional effect on the reader. So the emotive force of language is enhanced, and the mundane, ordinary, and common expression is rendered significance and beauty when it is expressed with the help of any scheme or trope. Schemes and tropes are referred to as rhetorical figures or devices used by the writers in which they depart from the straightforward expression or the literal sense of the language. Now, the straightforward language or the literal sense of the language is changed, enhanced, and it is complicated with the help of the use of schemes and tropes. And figures of speech are often used and are crafted for emphasis, for the sake of creating freshness into the expression, and for the sake of clarity and depth as well. So if a writer employs a metaphor, he does not need to give detailed, lengthy, elaborate explanations of a feeling or emotion. Making use of a metaphor explains the state of mind of a character or person or the poet. It explains the in-depth feeling or intensity of emotion as well. And then the writer can avoid giving unnecessary or elaborate details of that idea or the notion, which he can explain only with the help of a single word or a metaphor. So if a writer states that he felt like a fish out of water, now in this very expression the speaker has avoided the detail of his misery, his trouble, or his agony, but just explaining it with the help of a simile that he feels like a fish out of water explains to us what sort of agony, what sort of trouble a person is going through. So instead of saying that how much trouble he is facing, he used a simile of a fish out of water to explain his condition, that he is in the state of agony and is neither alive nor dead, and he is in trouble because of something that he just cannot explain or express. So such is the power of the literary figures and devices. We often adorn our speech with such metaphors for the sake of either expression of exaggeration, for the sake of expression of irony or satire as well. When we say that I've been waiting for you for ages, now we don't really mean that we literally have been waiting for a person for years and ages. Rather, we would have been waiting for a few minutes, but since the person is late, we exaggerate our agony or our ordeal of going through the process of wait, and we emphasize with the hyperbolic expression or exaggerated expression that it's been ages that I've been waiting for you. Now such expressions add force and weight to the thought and idea, and that is what the beauty of the use of schemes and tropes is, that if they are employed in poetry and literary writing, they make the expression elevated, they make the expression emotionally more charged up, and it also, on the other hand, helps the writer avoid details and descriptions which would appear mundane or maybe more taxing for the reader to read and understand. And those details, if they are devoid of any literary devices or metaphors or such expressions, would be not so literary as it would be the simple expression of the author or an ordinary person as well. So there are many reasons that the writers employ the schemes and tropes in their work and deviate from the normal standards of expression and writing. Either it is for the sake of avoiding descriptions of the detail of an idea, as well as it helps them to clarify something, present emotional intensity of an experience, and on the very surface it lends charm, beauty, freshness, and an air of creativity to the writing as well, which is the very hallmark of literary writings. Schemes and tropes are considered as a mode of expression or a method of expression in literature in which words are used out of their literal meaning. So literal meaning is abandoned when a literary device or schemes or tropes are used. For example, literal meaning is abandoned means that when I say that I've been waiting for you since ages, or for so many days, or I've been waiting for you for so long, I do not mean it literally, because I might have been waiting for just a few minutes. But when the person I've been waiting for comes, I try to assert that how much he or she has made me wait for her, that I just want to express my exasperation or my sort of anger at her being late. So literally, I do not mean that I've been waiting for ages. Otherwise, I would have grown old waiting for that person. But since the literal meaning is abandoned, I mean to say it more metaphorically, for the fact that she did make me wait for quite some time. So when literal meanings are abandoned and their ordinary use is what dominates in order to add beauty and emotional intensity to any expression, we transfer even the sense expressions as well of the experience. A poet would employ literary device or scheme or trope in order to impress the readers with the same feeling or emotion which he had felt or which he had gone through. And it helps us in comparing what he felt, and it helps us in identifying with the poet, with his sense expressions. So we can better identify with the poet or the author's sense expressions, his feelings and emotions, which the ordinary language or the simple language wouldn't have really highlighted. So the schemes or tropes revive or retrieve the freshness of the sensation, as well as the accuracy of the feeling and intensity of the emotion felt by the speaker or the writer. So schemes and tropes are collectively known as figures of speech, rhetorical devices, or stylistic devices, or even literary devices. So these are all the words or expressions which are used simultaneously for the schemes and tropes, which are included in the figures of speech, rhetorical figures, literary devices, or stylistic devices. So schemes and tropes is a more technical term. For a student of stylistics, figures of speech have a certain specific types. That is why we, as these learners of stylistics or the ones who are trying to explore the subject, must be familiar with that schemes and tropes are a specific term employed for the sake of explaining what figures of speech and what rhetorical devices are all about. And these are the two types that we divide the rhetorical devices into. Either the rhetorical devices or literary figures are schemes, or on the other hand they are tropes. Now, in order to understand both these, today we will focus on the schemes only, as the next few lectures would proceed or further explain what both these terms or carry or encompass within them, for the sake of creating either deviation or for the sake of creating parallelism in the text. Now we'll start our today's discussion by looking at in detail with schemes. Since there are multiple or numerous devices that fall within the category of schemes. We will look at just a few today, and those few would be analyzed with the help of examples. So we will understand today in detail what schemes are. We will separate schemes from tropes, know its meaning, know which particular devices or types of devices come under schemes, and then each device will be studied with respect to its use, its purpose, and its examples as well. So we start with the understanding of what schemes are. Schemes are the foregrounded repetitions. As I said earlier, that parallelism is created with the help of schemes, and deviation is created with the help of tropes. So any device which is used for the sake of creating repetition of expression, order, balance, rhythm, rhyme, symmetry, either at the sound level or either at the level of words, comes under the category of schemes. So schemes is the word derived from the Greek word schema, which means form or shape. So all such literary devices or rhetorical devices which change the form of writing, shape of writing, which operate at the level of sound and words, which are either repetitions or which are either the balanced or ordered expressions, they are referred to as schemes. Schemes are such figures of speech in which there is a deviation from the ordinary or expected pattern of words. Now, why are we using the word deviation here? Because schemes have nothing to do with deviation, rather tropes are what we use for deviation. But here it is explained in this sense that normal expression or ordinary expression of language does not allow us to make use of repetitions too much. For example, if a tongue twister relies on alliteration like seashells on the seashore. Now the s sound is repeated, s and sh sound, that is sibilance. We do not make use of such expressions in our ordinary speech, but in the form of jokes, in the form of songs, poems, tongue twisters, and riddles, we employ the alliteration. So that is why we say that even scheme is a deviation from the normal pattern of speech, because it is disturbing the normal pattern of speech. It is breaking the rules of the regular normal pattern of speech. So that is the sense here the word deviation is used for. So such figures of speech which create the repetition of expression, such figures of speech which create balance, regularity, order, rhyme, rhythm at the level of either the sound, phonology, or either at the level of the words or repetition of the words or anaphora. They are all included in the schemes. Schemes roughly have included figures such as alliteration and anaphora and chiasmus, and have been described as abnormal arrangements leading themselves to the forceful and harmonious presentation of ideas. In our study of the notion of parallelism, we have observed many such examples where the writers have used repetitive structures. Now the repetitive structures firstly enforce memorability. So if a writer makes use of sounds which are repeated, of the words which are repeated, what would the effect of such a reading be on the reader? Of course, the reader through the repetition will be able to remember them, and he will not be able to forget them for a long time. So such arrangements which make use of sound repetition or word repetition within close proximity, like we studied the example from Coleridge's Ancient Mariner, the furrow followed free. Now the furrow followed free was the repetition of the f sound, that is the alliteration. Now what does it do? It does create rhythm and rhyme, but it makes the line memorable as well. Such lines like the endings of the nursery rhymes, like Jack and Jill went up the hill. Now Jack and Jill and hill, they are rhyming together. What is the effect of such repetition of the sound, that ending sound on the word Jack? and then hill and Jill. Now these repetitions or these recurrences of the same sounds or even words, what type of effect do they create on the reader or on the overall shape of the work? How is it enhanced or changed? Now the very first reason is that the writers want that such devices should make the text balanced in such a way that it becomes rhythmic, and hence it is easy to be remembered or easy for the memorization for the reader. And schemes will be identified as phonological or formal grammatical or lexical pattern. Now, why do they operate at the level of form? Because they are concerned with the repetition of sound or the repetition of words. Now, they are not concerned with the change in meaning, with the disorder in meaning, with the depth or intensity to be added in meaning. So, we say that schemes are identified as phonological or formal patterns. Either they are lexical patterns or grammatical patterns. Lexical patterns, for instance, the repetition of the word, a single word. For example, if the repetitive lines of a sentence begin with the same word. This is the dead land, this is the cactus land, this is the land where nothing grows. Now these lines from Eliot's poem Hollow Man, they are creating repetition of the word, where the writer begins with this is the dead land, this is the cactus land. Now these repetitions are forcing the idea as if it is being heard like a drum beat, as it would be alarming for the reader, it would be a kind of a warning for the reader, it would be remembered by the reader if it is reiterated or if it is repeated. Similarly, if a sound is repeated, it becomes musical as well as memorable, like the furrow followed free. So we see that schemes operate on the level of the surface of the text. They have nothing to do with the meaning, they have nothing to do with the changing the meaning of the text. So schemes operate at the level of sound or at the level of words, which is the mere repetition for the sake of creating order, rhythm, balance and rhyme in the expression and the writing. Observe this example to understand the effect of schemes and the use of schemes in writing, specifically poetry, where the writers rely heavily on the device of repetition. Either it is the repetition of words or the repetition of sounds. It might be repetition of a single word or a single syllable, and it might also range from a single word or single syllables repetition to the repetition of a sentence after intervening matter, or repetition of a same word or a phrase or a clause. Now these repetitions make connections within the text. They also add to create it more, some text which is more cohesive and linked with the expressions that have been used earlier by the writers. Look at this example, that is farewell the tranquil mind, farewell content, farewell the plumbed troop and big wars that make ambition virtue. Oh, farewell, farewell the gnawing steed and the shrill stump, the spirit, stirring drum, the ear-piercing fife. Now, these lines are from Shakespeare's play Othello, and it is his farewell speech. Now, these lines simply make use of one word repeatedly, that is farewell. The first two lines begin with the same word, and in the first line, which has got two parts, farewell the tranquil mind, and then the second part, farewell content. Now, this is the repetition or the simple example of mere repetition of the same word, which is repeated in the third line at the end of the sentence. Then the fourth line makes use of this word in the very beginning, and we see that the writer has emphasized upon the idea of Othello giving a speech at the time of his departure or at the very end of the play. So this is for the sake of bringing down to the mind of the reader the idea of ending, the idea of departure, the idea of farewell in terms of either the exit from the world as well as his ambitions or his ideals. So this simple repetition, if it is pronounced vocally, also adds music to the writing. It also adds rhythm to the writing, and it also creates unity within the stanza or within the expression. Now that we understand that schemes are repetitions which operate at the level of word and sound, and schemes are those devices which are used for the sake of creating parallelism in the writing. So a writing is made to appear parallel, ordered and balanced when a writer relies on the use of schemes. And schemes usually do not operate at the level of meaning or at the deeper level of the text. They operate on the surface, and the surface is connected with the sounds. The surface is connected with the syllables and words. Now let us move further in our understanding of the classification of the figures of speech. Writers use innumerable ways for their expression, either emotions of anger, frustration, grief, guilt, longing, loneliness, suffering. These would be extended, enhanced and elaborate if they are used with the help of a trope or a scheme. So when a writer relies on the devices of repetition, he prolongs an experience, he prolongs a feeling, hence he lets the reader experience that intensity which the writer has felt, or which a character has felt, which the writer wants to convey to the reader and wants him also to sympathize with the character. Because writers turn their words in various ways, and literary critics have attempted to analyze and categorize these deviations and parallel structures in the use of words in order to gain better control over the intended thought and feeling of the author. So when we explore these schemes, when we assign meaning to the use of such schemes, we can extend the thought, the feeling, the emotion, the expression which the writer has tried to make the word contain, or which he has expressed through the use of particular words, repetitions and sounds. So it makes us connect with the author's intention or with the emotion that the work or the writing carries. Now that we are looking in detail at the notion of schemes in literary writings, or what as a stylistician or a learner of stylistics we are supposed to look for in our study of the schemes, we see that schemes involve a number of figures. If you want to have a look at the different figures and schemes or rhetorical devices which a writer may use to create repetition, order, balance and rhyme in a text, we can divide these devices into a number of other categories too. Now the other categories are innumerable, and one first category that we will look at for the sake of understanding the schemes or the devices of rhetorics or the devices of the stylistic analysis, we divide these devices firstly into categories. And the first category involves figures of repetition or figures involving repetition. Now there are specific figures of speech, there are specific literary devices or stylistic devices which a writer can use to create repetition. Now what are those repetitive devices? We will look at about 4 to 5 of such devices with examples today, since these devices are the repetition of either the sound or the words. So they are very simple to understand because there is no involvement of meaning or change of meaning like it is in metaphor. So that is why knowing and understanding the devices of literary writing which involve simple repetition of words and sounds, it reveals that it is the structure or the form which is enhanced, improved, changed or beautified through the use of figures of repetition. Repetition is one of the major rhetorical strategies for producing emphasis. In our study of parallelism, we distinguished parallelism for the very fact that parallelism is utilized by a writer to make the text or writing or parts of writing more memorable and more worthy of the interest and attention of the reader. So something in writing and speech, if it is repeated, is remembered for longer time. So that is why repetitions would add the memorability. They would add to the idea of retaining the idea for more longer a time than something that is not repeated. So repetition is a major rhetorical strategy or device that is related to the production of meaning, that is also important for the sake of creating emphasis, clarity and amplification, and also it is used for emotional effect. So amplification means when something is enhanced, increased. So when something is repeated, it seems to have increased its intensity or its value or its importance. So if a writer repeats a word, a phrase, a sentence, he wants to enhance the importance of that idea. That is why he repeats it, apart from the fact that he wants us or the reader to remember it, or he wants the reader to focus his attention on what is repeated, because what is repeated is more significant than anything else. And it also is associated with emotional effect. For example, if you are in a state of agony, you would repeat a word. You would say the same word again and again. If a writer shows the exasperation of a character after committing a crime, he would be asking himself, why have I done that? Why me? Now these expressions that the writer has made a character utter, that there is a repetition of the word why. He's questioning himself, he's questioning his fate, he's questioning God, he is asking what is it that made him do so. So it is also used for the sake of emotional effect. Now within the rhetoric, there are terms which have been developed to name both general and very specific sorts of repetition. So if we choose figures of repetition as one category of schemes, now look that there is quite a hierarchical way that we are moving towards our understanding of the very specific devices. We see parallelism, which is created through schemes, and then within schemes we identified figures of repetition, and now within the figures of repetition, which are the part of schemes used to create parallelism, there lie two categories which are further categories, and these are figures which would involve repetition at the level of sound, and there would be figures which would involve repetition at the level of word or clause. Now this means that there are two levels within figures of repetition too. Repetition of sound is different from the repetition of words. Look at this example that is from the poem of Robert Frost. The poem is Road Not Taken. At the ending of the Road Not Taken, Robert Frost repeats these lines. And miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleeps. Now this is a mere verbal repetition. A same line is repeated in the end of the poem for the sake of giving us the idea of longing, for the sake of giving us the idea of desire, that he still wants, that he has miles to go before I sleep, he has miles to go before he is dead or he leaves the world. He has lots of things to do. So it's a visual thinking, it's a whimsical thought, or it's a longing or a desire. And longing or desire that lies deep in the heart gets its expression in the form of the repetition, which reveals a sort of, you can say, echo, as if it is resonating in the air. But the desire of the speaker is that he wants to do so much before he dies. He wants to do so much. He wants to achieve so much before he comes to meet his end. Now, repetition adds flavor. It adds to memorability, it adds to emphasis, it adds clarity, it adds to highlight the significant part of a text where the writer wants the reader to focus more attention. He would make use of repetition. Observe another example of repetition. Here it is from Coleridge's poem, La Belladame Sans Mercy. Oh, what can ail thee, knight-at-arms, alone and palely loitering? The sedge has withered from the lake, and no birds sing. Oh, what can ail thee, knight-at-arms, so haggard and so woe-begone? The squirrel's granary is full, and the harvest done. Now, the sentence, oh, what can ail thee, knight-at-arms, is repeated in the second part after the intervening material. Now, oh, what can ail thee, knight-at-arms, is a question or is an interrogative statement. And then the comparison of the knight-at-arms and the state of the place where he lives. Now, this idea has been brought home to the reader with the help of the single statement or question which is repeated in the beginning of both these stanzas of the poem. So this is the mere verbal repetition where we see the repetition of the whole line. The same line recurs. In Frost's poem, it occurs side by side. The very second line is which repeats the first line. And in the example by Coleridge, it is repeated after some intervening material or the lines of the next stanza. Now, as we see that parallelism can be created with the help of schemes, and schemes carry within them multiple devices, and one category of those devices which are referred to as schemes is the figures of repetition, or the devices used for creating repetition and order in the text. Now, repetition is of two types: repetition of the sound and repetition of the words. Now, repetition of sound includes devices like alliteration, assonance, and consonance. And repetition of words includes such devices like anaphora, epanellapsis, epistrophe, and symplock. Now, the first category that includes the repetition of sounds like use of alliteration, assonance, consonance. You might be familiar with these terms. But as far as the second is concerned, the names which appear to be too heavy or not so digestible would have made you feel that it might be a difficult thing to remember. But remembering that names is difficult, as the names are the Greek derivations. But what they really are is very simple to identify, as we will be identifying it with the help of certain examples. You will notice that only it is the name that is confusing or a bit strange or difficult to remember. What the device is, what you come across very often in writing. So, we will study the figures of repetition today, and from among the figures of repetition, we will study the repetitions that operate at the level of sound, like repetitions in the form of alliteration, assonance, and consonance. And we will also study repetition of words, which include anaphora, epanellapsis, epistrophe, and symplock. Now let us look at all these one by one with the help of examples, and we study them as devices of repetition or figures involving repetition, which are schemes which create balance and which help in the repetition of the structures and words for the sake of creating parallelism. So this is how we form a link. Parallelism through the use of schemes. Schemes may have figures of repetition. Figures of repetition further divided into repetition of sound, repetition of words. So this is how you make the whole cluster. For parallelism, a writer employs schemes. There are plenty of devices in schemes, but one such category of devices within schemes is referred to as figures of repetition or devices of repetition. There are many devices that can create repetition. But what are their types? There are a few devices that operate at the level of sound, and there are other devices which operate at the level of words. So those devices which operate at the level of sounds is what we will have a look at today in detail, and then we will move on to the devices of repetition at the level of sound, at the level of words. So after we study the repetition at the level of sound, we will move forward to the study of the devices which operate at the level of words, or which are the repetitions of words. Now the first device of the repetition at the level of sound is alliteration. Now alliteration is the simplest and easiest device of repetition which you can locate, which you can remember, and which you can comment upon in a text. Now alliteration is the repetition of the initial consonant sound in neighboring words or words in close proximity, either in the same line or in the 2 or 3 consecutive lines. Now the matching of repetition of consonant sounds is called alliteration of the, or the repetition of the same letter at the beginning of a word, at the following lines, or even within a single line, like the furrow followed free, like she sells seashells on the seashore. Now there is example of repetition of f sound in one and the s sound in another. Look at this example of alliteration, and to remember alliteration, one thing must be kept in mind, that it is the repetition of the initial consonant sound. The consonant sound, to make alliteration, has to occur in the very first syllable, the initial sound, and that of consonant, not vowel. So alliteration is always of a consonant sound. This example is, now Beowulf bode in the burg of Skelding's leader beloved. Now the repetition of the b sound in Beowulf, bode, burg, and beloved. So in the close connected words, words which are in close proximity, the sound b is repeated in Beowulf, bode, burg, and beloved. So this is how we locate or identify alliteration. Like rhyme, alliteration is a very common device employed by the writers, either in lyrics or in epics or in odes. And like rhyme, it is of great help to memory. It is a powerful device that the prose has also borrowed from poetry. And it is alliteration that makes us remember such phrases like sink or swim, do or die, live or let live, watch, waiting, and poor but proud, hale and hearty, green as grass, cool as cucumber. Now these expressions have got alliteration. That is why these expressions last longer in our memory. We don't really feel the effort to remember these expressions. The alliteration or the repetition of the vowel sound in these words makes these words memorable, like do or die, hale and hearty, live and let live, watchful waiting, green grass, cool as cucumber, green as grass. Now these alliterative patterns within the structure of these maxims make these maxims unforgettable, or they last longer in our memory because they rely on the repetition of the same sound. So it creates a sort of verbal or correspondence at the level of expression or the word. Now the verbal correspondence at the level of sound is one of the ways through which we find remembering a text is easier. Apart from alliteration, there are some other devices too that operate at the level of sound, and the other one is assonance. Now alliteration is the repetition of the initial consonant sound, and assonance is the repetition of the vowel sound. For example, look at the repetition of the vowel in this line by Coleridge: alone, alone, all alone. Now, in this line, the repetition of the initial sound is what is referred to as assonance. So, if alliteration is the repetition of the consonant sound, assonance is the repetition of the vowel sound. Then comes the third figure of repetition of sound, that is referred to as consonance. As the name suggests, consonant would be the repetition of consonant sound. But how is it different from alliteration? It is different from alliteration in that alliteration operates at the level of similarity of sound in the beginning of a word, whereas consonants may occur in syllables which may not be occurring at the beginning. Look at this example to make it clear that consonant is repetition of consonant sounds, and that would occur in the ending too. To toll me back to thee, to my soul self. Now, to, toll, to, thee, to. Now, these expressions are repetition of the consonant sound, and this consonant sound makes us see that this is even the repetition that occurs in the closer proximity of the writing or expression. Now, assonance, consonance, alliteration, they are all the devices or figures of repetition, either at the level of sound which is occurring in the middle of a word, or a sound which is occurring in the beginning of a word. So, these devices, which are devices of repetition or figures of repetition of sound, they create internal rhyme, they create even rhythm and balance, and they are associated with even the meter and balance of a poem or expression. So these are the three devices which we call alliteration, assonance, and consonance. Alliteration is initial repetition of a consonant sound, assonance is the repetition of vowel sound, and consonance is the repetition of the consonant sound. Now, let us come to the second category of the repetition of sounds or the figures of repetition. Now, this repetition is the second category of repetition which does not operate at the level of sound but at the level of the word. What is it? That it is referred to as anaphora. Now, anaphora is the very simplest and the most common device of repetition or of expression. Anaphora is a figure of speech in which we see repetition that occurs when the first word or set of words in one sentence, clause, or phrase is repeated at the beginning of successive phrases. For example, look at this chunk from the writing, that is this royal throne of kings, this sceptred isle, this earth of majesty, this seat of Mars. Now, here is repetition of the word this. This is the very first word, and then it is the very first word in the successive lines and also the successive segments. This royal throne of kings, this sceptred isle, and then repetition, this earth of majesty, and again repetition, this seat of majesty. So, an easy formula to remember anaphora as a device is this one, that there is repetition and the words that follow would be different. Then again the word would be the same as was in the beginning of the first line, and then the intervening matter or the following matter would be different. That is why we put this formula in practice, A and dots. A is referring to the very word which is repeated, like this, and the dots refer to the rest of the writing, like royal throne of kings is what changes. Then this is the same, so that is why we put the A in the formula again, and then we refer to the fact that the intervening material or the words that follow would be different. So you can remember anaphora with this formula. Put an A, then put 3 dots, then again put an A, put 3 dots. What would it help you in remembering is that it would help you to understand that one word that is repeated is the same that stands for A. So A symbolizes the consonant element, that is the constant in the bracket, this, and then it symbolizes the equivalent structure and a phrase, clause or a sentence that would follow. So the three dots would be the material that would follow, the words that would follow. Those might not be repetitive. Repetitive is only the word that the line or the text begins with, and then the same is repeated in the beginning of the next line or the next clause, just the way it is over here, that not only the next line, this earth of majesty, starts with the word this, but also the second segment or the part, this royal throne of kings, after that this sceptered isle, this also begins with the word this. So that is why if you put A at the place of this and three dots at the place of what occurs later, because what occurs later is different in all the four segments of this example. Now anaphora is repetition of the word in the beginning. So the first word of a sentence or a line or a clause or a phrase would be the same, like this is the throne of the king, this is the earth of majesty. Now second device of repetition of the words is referred to as epanellapsis. As the name is a bit difficult to remember, but what it contains, I hope, is pretty simple. If you remember it with the help of an example and a formula, you will be pretty much comfortable in identifying it. But you have to remember the title or the very name of the device, as it is epanellapsis, because these are all the Greek words. So the English did not change it much. That is why they might be a bit difficult for you to comprehend and remember, but this is how we remember them. Now epanellapsis is repetition of the same word, clause, sentence, or even phrase after some intervening material. Look at the formula, A, dots and A. What was the previous formula? Since in the previous formula, repetition occurred only in the initial word, it did not occur in the end. So that is why we left the ending open. It can be anything. So that is why A did not follow any other letter, either A or B, but dots, because the beginning has to be the same. The initial or the first word of a sentence or a section or a clause or a phrase has to be the same. And epanellapsis, if you compare it with anaphora, adds something to it, that not only the beginning but also the ending is on the same word. So it goes a step further from anaphora. To create anaphora, a writer chooses to make the words or to start the word with the same words within the closely connected lines, and he would make the sentence end with the same line with which it started. So that is why the formula is A dots and A, or B dots and B, because it may be repeated or may not be repeated. If it is in poem, it may be repeated. Repetition of the same word, clause, sentence after intervening matter is strictly the repetition at the end of the line, phrase, clause, or the word, or it may be set of words that occurs in the beginning of the same line, phrase, clause, or sentence. So look at this line, then you will be able to remove the confusion, if you have any in your mind about the repetition, that if anaphora was only repetition at the first word or of the first word, every first word in every line, clause, or the phrase would be the same. That is anaphora. But if the beginning and the ending are happening at the same word or with the help of the same word deliberately, then it is referred to as epanellapsis. Look at this example: with ruin upon ruin, rout on rout, confusion worse confounded. Now the beginning, like ruin upon ruin, rout on rout. Now look at this, that the rout on rout and ruin upon ruin, they are creating that formula or the repetition of epanellapsis. And confusion and confounded, though the word confusion has been changed into confounded, but it has the same initial sound, like confuse and confound. So this is the another example, that is a lie begets a lie. Now the sentence starts with a lie and ends with a lie, and intervening matter is begets. So that is where you apply the formula A, 3 dots, and A. A represents the repetition of the word a lie, and then dots represent the intervening material which might be different in every sentence, and then A again, because what was used in the beginning of a sentence is repeated in the ending as well. So it becomes A, dots, and A as a formula to remember the use of epanellapsis. Look at the second example, that is believe not all you can hear, tell not all you believe. Now this is the same repetition. The sentence starts with the word believe, then occurs the intervening material that is different, and then it ends on the same word, that is believe. So this confirms that epanellapsis is a figure of repetition or a device of repetition in which a writer makes use of a word in the beginning of a sentence and would make the ending of the sentence happen on the same word. So that is why the formula A, dots, and then A is applied over here. Just as in the case of anaphora, the formula was A and then 3 dots, because the beginning was the same, or beginning of the closely connected lines, phrases, or clauses. Here the beginning and ending of the lines, either a single line or many lines within the text, would be the same, and it would be referred to as the use of epanellapsis. If you remember these devices, like the devices of repetition of words, with the help of the formula, you will be able to retain it for longer. And if you remember with the help of example, like a lie begets a lie is epanellapsis. Now if you remember this as a formula, that a lie begets a lie is epanellapsis, so it means that any repetition that occurs at the initial word and the last word of a sentence, clause, or a phrase is epanellapsis, because a lie begets a lie would be a kind of identification for you to remember it. Now let's come to the third device of repetition at the level of words. It is referred to as epistrophe. Now epistrophe is such a repetition which occurs only at the end of a sentence, clause, or phrase. So epanellapsis is called also antistrophe. So another title or the word used for epistrophe is antistrophe. It is a figure of repetition that is the opposite of anaphora. So simply to remember what epistrophe is, remember that it is opposite of anaphora. If anaphora is the repetition of the beginning word or the initial word in closely connected lines or phrases, then epistrophe is the repetition of the last word of a sentence or a clause or a phrase. So this formula will help you remember it forever. That is, we put 3 dots, that the beginning would be anything, the middle would be anything, but the ending would be the same. The ending of the consecutive lines would be happening on the same word, either a single word or a phrase or a clause or set of words. Look at this example. A lie, what lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny as compared to what lies within us. And then you see the repetition of the word us. What lies behind us? Now this clause is ending with the word us, and what lies before us, then as compared to what lies within us. So these 3 sections of a single sentence are ending with the same word us. Then in the form of another example, hourly joys be still upon you, Juno sings her blessings on you. So these 2 lines are ending on the same word you. So that is where the formula also applies. 3 dots reveal to the material that is different, the words that are different, and you is the word which is repeated, and that is the ending repetition. So epistrophe is repetition at the end of a sentence, clause, or sentence, whereas epanellapsis was repetition at both the ends, beginning and end, and anaphora was just the beginning. Anaphora is the repetition of the initial word in a sentence or a phrase or a clause. Epanellapsis is the repetition that would occur at beginning and at the end as well. Then if you look at epistrophe, it is the repetition only at the end. So that is how you find these devices, and these devices are so common in poetry. Either you take modern poetry, romantic poetry, classical poetry, you would be able to find abundant examples. Now, up till now, since you did not know these names, you might not have ever been able to locate these, but these are such devices which help to memorize, remember, and utter these lines so musically and rhythmically, because these repetitions add to memorability, add to balance and rhyme, and even they emphasize a point or idea. Now look at the fourth one, that is referred to as symblock. Now again, the name is difficult. That is a Greek derivation. Again, we haven't any control over it. We cannot name it any other way. But symblock is the repetition of such a kind where the consecutive lines would begin with the same word and the ending would be of the same. That is the change that is shown, that what one line begins with would be what the next line would also begin with, and the ending of both would be also the same. So symblock is such a figure of repetition that combines anaphora and epistrophe. So that is why we are studying it in the end, that it combines anaphora and epistrophe. What was anaphora? Only the initial repetition. What was epistrophe? Only the repetition at the end. Now if they are contained or used with within the consecutive lines, they are made to be appear like symblock. So symblock is the combination of anaphora and epistrophe, in which the first and last word or words in either a phrase, a clause, or a sentence are repeated in one or more successive phrases, clauses, or even sentences. So it is the repetition of the first and last word or set of words over successive lines. Now look at this example. You will understand that against yourself you are calling him. Against the laws you are calling him. Against the democratic institutions you are calling him. Now against is what is anaphora, repeated 3 times in the lines. Him is what you refer to as epistrophe, that is this ending is the same. But when the repetition of one side, that is the beginning, and the other side, that is the ending, is consistently kept the same, as against occurs repeatedly in the beginning, him occurs repeatedly in the ending, then it becomes a device that you refer to as symblock. And symblock can be remembered with the help of the formula A and B, and then A and B, because it is repeated. If the line, a single line can be taken as example, it would not justify the device, because it is the method in every sentence that it may begin with one word and end with some other, but it has to recur. It has to be repeated in the consecutive lines or the next lines. So that is why we say A, B and A, B twice. Why? Because it is the combination of anaphora, that is the repetition of the initial word, and it is the combination of the epistrophe, that is the repetition of the ending word. So if in consecutive lines we see the beginning word the same and the ending word the same in the consecutive lines, we call such a device as symblock. So symblock is simply the combination of anaphora and epistrophe. Anaphora initial repetition, epistrophe, ending repetition. So this is what we see as the devices or figures of repetition. We looked at some devices of repetition which operate at the level of sound that we termed as alliteration, assonance and consonance, which do not change the meaning, which just add to the rhythm, beauty and rhyme as the alliterative and assonance or consonance devices add musical quality and rhythm to the poem. As far as repetition of the words was concerned, we looked at simplock, that is the double repetition that contains the anaphora as well as epistrophe too. We also looked at epistrophe, which is the repetition at the end of a line or a word or a clause. We looked at epanallepsis, that is where the beginning and end of a line, clause or a phrase are the same. And we also looked at epanallepsis, where we see the repetition of the same word after intervening matter. The beginning and ending are the same in epanallepsis. Now, I tried to explain these devices which have got a bit difficult term or a name which you will have a little difficulty to remember, but since I earlier told you that these are the rhetorical figures of speech or devices which have been borrowed and derived from the Greek rhetoric or Greek literary canon, that is why their titles are a bit difficult to remember. Like apart from anaphora, it's difficult to remember epanallepsis, anadiplosis or epistrophe or simplock. But if you remember these devices with the help of the formula or at least one example, like epanallepsis is repetition of a word that is there in the beginning of a sentence and ending of a sentence, and remember it with the maxim a lie begets a lie. So if you remember at least one example for each of these four devices, you will not forget them ever. And then you will be able to identify these devices in the poems and the even plays or even prose. So writers make use of repetition, devices of repetition, to add to the memorability, to make the writing appear distinct and unique from ordinary writing and the language of speech, and also for the sake of emphasis. And apart from everything that is either emphasis or memorability which the writer wants to achieve, a writer's focus is on beautifying the text, on enhancing the appearance of a text. So that is why such devices of repetition, either these are devices of repetition of the sound, or these are the devices of repetition of words. They are employed in a text to create a scheme, to create an order, to create a balance, and this is how parallelism is achieved. Parallelism is a broader concept, and to achieve parallelism, a writer would employ any devices out of the category of schemes, and one category within schemes is devices of repetition of sound, and another is devices of repetition of words. So today we looked at in detail at the figures or the devices of repetition which we call schemes. So in the next class or in our next lecture of discussion, we will have a look at some other schemes which a writer makes use of for the sake of creating symmetry and balance and repetition in a text. So these devices which add to regularity in a text are multiple and are numerous, and in the next lecture we will have a look at some more devices, and we will also of course recap what we learned today in the next lecture. Thank you.